Alright everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sarius. Today I'm bringing you an in-depth Typhon build video. So just like my other in-depth guides, we're going to be going over every single aspect of the build. I'll go ahead and run through my gear really quickly if you just want to try and copy paste stuff, but I wouldn't recommend it. And so the basic concept of this build, if we're using the first and the fourth shard, and we're taking advantage of Mistveil, as I'm showing you right now, to essentially double dip, or I guess that's not the right term here. We're going to essentially apply this element twice, right, using Mistveil. And this ends up being very, very strong, does a ton of damage, and in fact, I would even say it's pretty much Mesa tier damage. Very, very good build. Definitely more finicky to use than a Mesa build. It's got some ins and outs you need to know, but it's a pretty good build overall. So let's go ahead and get started. First things first, like usual, we're going to start with just a basic damage showcase. Now it's actually pretty hard to show you the damage output of this build in the training room, so I've got some footage rolling in the background showing off the shard damage for you. Again, as always, there will be a full Exalted Tower run linked in the description, so you can go check that out to see how it performs in game. But this is just a damage showcase, and you can go see that for yourself. So, another few things to note about this build is that our damage is very, very reliant on our fourth shard and the Mistveil Augment, which doubles the amount of stacks we get from it. And it is actually quite good, as you can see, quite a bit of damage with the shard. And let's cover a few things. So your actual damage on like just your hits aren't going to be super strong, but honestly, for your actual damage hits, you're really just looking to hit the breakpoint of where you can charge your shard in a single consume after a northern technique, which you can do with Shield Bash or any aura. So Explosive Wave and Shield Bash and Spinning Blast all work for charging your shard. Just keep that in mind. This is very, very good. And this is going to be the primary way you're going to charge your shard. Another thing to note is that technically you will only need 4 elements on the enemy to proc the Mistveil Augment, right? Well, I guess you didn't get to see it right there, but basically, as long as you have a source of petrifying slams and fixed elements, you only need 4 stacks to activate Mistveil, because the petrifying itself, slam itself will apply an element, and then your shard will activate and apply its element, and that element will apply twice, right? So you're definitely going to want to run Petrifying Slam and Fix elements somewhere on your build. And honestly, the easiest source of that, and probably the most useful source of that, is going to be the Grandmaster Station or Kaleva's Legacy with that effect, but we'll get more into that later. But yeah, basically for your actual hit damage, you really only care about getting enough damage to charge your shard after a single northern technique. And that's really it, right? And that's pretty much all I have for the basic damage showcase. Like I said, most of the damage is from the shard. So now, let's talk about the shards in depth. Before the shards, we are, of course, running the 4th shard Frost Shield. This is obviously the key to the build. But for your other shard, and I've already gone into how this works, but the other shard honestly doesn't matter too much. Honestly, none of these shards are particularly good. I would say just don't run Blizzard Technique. So you can honestly run either Bitter Cold or Way of the Kraken. I find Way of the Kraken is more useful overall, but you could use Way of the Bitter Cold if you want. The only reason I don't like this is because the main source of Spectral Blow is a shield throw, and that can use as our shield charge, and I just don't want to spend the shield charge on it, basically, right? I mean, it does consume chill, but this doesn't actually build charge for your 4th shard, so this isn't actually as useful as you might think. My first assumption when I saw this was that this would synergize with the 4th shard and be really good, but unfortunately that is not the case, so just be aware of that. But if you really want to use it, I guess you can, but I don't really recommend it too much. I'm going to recommend Way of the Kraken and Frost Shield. So and that's going to be pretty much it for the shards. So now, let's talk about the skill tree. So for your skills, there are a few things that you're going to want to have for sure. The usual things like Weapon Techniques 5, Weapon Timing 5, Critical Hit Chance 5, Arcane Fury, but The things I want to talk about and emphasize is going to be 5 the 5th point in elements, and then obviously 3 and 5 points in shield attacks to use it. Another thing I'm going to recommend is Explosive Wave, because it does work. You can charge your shard with the Explosive Wave, so it's worth picking up in my opinion. But you're definitely going to want the 5th point in elements, and you're definitely going to want at least 3 points in shield attacks. Spinning Blast isn't necessary, it's 2 points set. I mean, it's only 2 points, and honestly, Spinning Blast is better than Shield Bash for consuming. And remember, explosive shield attack, so Shield Bash, Spinning Blast, and Explosive Wave will all charge your 4th shard. They'll all charge your Vengeance meter. Keep that in mind. Everything else, just the usual stuff: resistances, all stats, Spirit, Vitality. You don't need Might. Only 1 point in Rampage is always nice. I went for some Polarity just because it's nice. But honestly, lots of wiggle room outside of stuff like, weapon timing attacks, weapon techniques, and these points here, right? Just keep those in mind, that you do need the 5th point and the relevant skills. And that's pretty much all there is to talk about the shards, the skills. And now let's talk about the weapons. So for the weapons, we are once again running a longsword. I know you guys might be tired of longsword builds, but longsword is the best weapon in the game. And in this case specifically, we are looking for a specific primary effect for this build that's very important. And that is shield charge whenever you perform a critical hit. And that's because, well, we want to build the spam shield attacks, right? Because not only do we have to do shield attacks to charge our 4th shard, we had to do a petrifying slam to use our 4th shard, right? So we definitely, absolutely need this effect on a weapon. Now, if you don't have a double primary with it, you can get the non-double primary, the standard version, which is a purple weapon called the Dragon Coil. Let me see if I can find it for you. Where is it? There it is. Scroll past it again. Oh my God. There it is. So you can get a Dragon Coil. Obviously, make sure it's a water DPS one. So either a Blade of Conquest or Blade of Dominance or a Dragon Coil. Any of these will work just fine. Just remember to get yourself a decent amount of crit chance on your build one way or the other. Whatever. So I would recommend you go for like at least 60%. And if you can get Blessing of Luck on the Blade of Conquest as well, that's very, very nice. See, I've gotten pretty lucky with mine. And in fact, mine also allows me to not use a ring weapon techniques and fixed elements. This isn't mandatory at all, but you really, really absolutely must have the shield charge when you perform a critical hit. Now, and that's pretty much it for the longsword. Now, for your offhand, you have a choice of pretty much whatever you want to run here, to be honest. I, of course, am running a Spirit Reaper with the Greater Blessing of Endurance on the offhand on the Polarity attack. And that's literally all this is for. Pop a Polarity attack, get my Blessing of Endurance, and switch back, right? All this is for. But you can use whatever you want here, really. Just keep that in mind, that this is very, very useful. But other than that, that's going to be it for the weapons. Now, let's talk about the Amulet. So for the Amulet, I am, of course, recommending the Grandmaster Station for 2 reasons, actually. One, the Mark of Weakness is obviously very useful, makes enemies deal less damage to you. It's a great survivability tool, but honestly, in this case, more importantly, is the Petrifying Slams and Flex Elements effect. This is mandatory for this build, in my opinion. It makes the build flow a lot better, and the reasoning why, just to go over it once again, is because of Mist Veil. So essentially what this happens is, this allows you, combined with Petrifying Slams and Flex Elements, essentially lets you apply Mist Veil to your shard after only doing a single Northern technique, so only 4 stacks, right? Like your Northern technique will apply 4, you'll use your Petrifying Slam, which will apply a 5th element, and then your shard will apply, which will then apply an extra element, since Mist Veil will now be active. This is incredibly strong. It effectively doubles the damage output of your 4th shard. This is absolutely mandatory for this build. Now, if you've got a good Cololopus Legacy with some other useful effect on it, you can obviously use that, no problem at all. But you must have Petrifying Slams and Flex Elements somewhere on your build, and this is the easiest and probably the most useful source of it, in my opinion. But just keep that in mind. You absolutely must have that effect. But I guess you could get it somewhere else if you really wanted to. Now that said, That's pretty much all there is to talk about the charm, or the amulet. So now let's get into the charm. So you're probably all familiar with the Lion Talisman at this point, but once again, this is one of the best charms in the game, especially for builds like this, which are going to be reliant on weapon techniques. This is a must-have. Pretty much the only real alternative for this is a Mephra Star, which also has this and something else, right? So, and that's really it. You do need the Lion Talisman effect on your build, basically. And there isn't really a good alternative, and honestly, there isn't really anything else too useful anyways. Probably the most useful other effect I can think of for this build would maybe be this effect, where it gives you Blessing of Luck whenever you inflict chill. This is pretty useful for this build. So if you have something like this, this could replace Blessing of Luck on your longsword if you had a good Mephra Star with both of these effects. But again, just get yourself a Lion Talisman and call it a day. And that's pretty much all there is to talk about for the charms. Now, let's talk about the rings. So for the rings, what I'm using and what I'm recommending are probably two different things. But for one, Mark of the Red Armor, obviously this is very, very strong. I highly recommend you use this. It's a great ring with a very useful effect and gives you a ton of over health gain. Not much, kind of a no-brainer here. Now, I am using a Sanguine ring because I have weapon techniques inflicts elements on my weapon. Now, if you do not have this, you do need to run either the Eye of the Dragon or the Duskward Signet. I'm going to recommend you run the Eye of the Dragon. Get yourself a decent Eye of the Dragon, put it on. But if you can get, a sword like this, or something similar, you can run the Sanguine ring or something else to get yourself some more element power and duration. Otherwise, you're probably going to make sacrifices somewhere else in the build to get enough element power and duration to hit that break point where you deal enough damage with a single northern technique to build your shard in a single northern technique, right? So keep that in mind. Honestly, not too much else to talk about rings. Nothing incredibly useful to replace this with, to be honest. I suppose if you... honestly, this is just what I'm going to recommend. You could theoretically replace Mark of the Red Armor or Eye of the Dragon and then run some more overhealth gain on your tree, but this is one of your sources for water damage, these green augments, but also for ammo power and duration. Let's keep that in mind. So, kind of up to you, but I'm going to recommend Mark of the Red Armor for sure, and then either Sanguine Ring or Eye of the Dragon. And that's going to be pretty much it for the rings. So now let's talk about the stone and the banner. So for the stone and the banner, as usual for any consume build, like any other consume build, I'm recommending the Plague Pendant. Obviously, this is kind of a no-brainer, definitely a must-have. For your stone, you can either use, like me, you can be lazy and just use a standard Archon's tier that you use for everything, or you can use the Entropic Moondrip, which just gives you water damage. This is pretty useful for this build, because while I haven't really gone into it yet, and plan to go to into the Augments session, your 4 shard does scale with water damage. So just keep that in mind. And the Entropic Moondrip drop can increase your shard damage a lot. Normally I wouldn't care, but with how reliant this build is on the shard, I think it's worth bothering with for once, right? And that's pretty much all there is to talk about the stone and the banner. There aren't really any alternatives, so get into the augments. Now we get to the augments, is where I'm going to start talking more about substats and what substats are important, which I'll be covering those in the important details section later, but this is kind of the point where they start getting more relevant. And the first thing I want to bring up is that your shard, the 4 shard, does scale with water damage. So you do want to try to get water damage where you can. That said, just remember you need enough element power and duration to deal enough consume damage to charge your 4th shard reliably. So there is a bit of a balance. You can see I've got some element power and duration on mostly my vitality augments, and then I've got water damage on everything else. And this is been the balance I found this worked for me. As you can see, I've got 140 power and 140 duration and 300% power. This is just basically how things ended up working out for me. because I was just trying to get enough element consume damage to hit that breakpoint, right? Although a lot of the element power does come from my ring, and a much more balanced stat distribution before I switched to that ring, but just keep that in mind. But as for the actual augments we're using, obviously Mist Veil is the key. The enchanted tier as well, obviously very useful. And then Divine Conduit is probably the most useful thing we can put in here as filler. Now focus for overhealth generation, obviously very useful. A Void Shell for the same thing, more overhealth generation. And a Paradise for weapon technique generation. This is pretty important. Glamour and Rift are also very, very good on this build, and they're very easy to slot in. So I definitely recommend you run these as well. I suppose you could technically run a Twilight Bloom here instead, but I would recommend Glamour and Rift personally. Keep that in mind. And that's pretty much all there is. Remember, for substats, you're going to want water damage, and you want enough element power and duration that you do enough. And it does affect your damage output of your 4th shard, but water damage is the primary thing that's going to increase your damage out of that. So, and that's pretty much all there really is to talk about for your augments. And now, let's talk about the playstyle. Now, the playstyle of this build is very simple, right? It isn't anything else to it other than remember to get 4 stacks on the enemy before you use your shard. You can't really see it here because he's dying, but when you do that, that allows you to set up your Mist Veil. Your Petrifying Slam applies 1 element, and your shard will then apply 2, because then at that point the enemy has 5 element stacks on them. Keep that in mind. The other thing to keep in note is that you have to charge your shard through shield damage, which does again include shield consume damage, right? So now I bash him, and then it charges my shard, right? And again, this works with Spinning Blast, and it works with Explosive Wave as well. And that's pretty much all there is to the playstyle of the build. That is very, very standard longsword play. For the Exalted Tower, pretty much the same stuff as usual. Running as they're spawning. Your Sonic Slam, put your banner down. Use your Yarkon Fury, then do a Northern Technique, and assuming you already have your shard. One thing to note is that if you do get hit during the startup of your Petrifying Slam, you will block the attack, but it will cancel your Petrifying Slam. It is something to take note of. Be careful of that. I almost forgot to mention it. Thanks to Decimus for reminding me, but that's pretty much all there is to it. Again, just remember to apply 4 element stacks with your Northern Technique before you use your shard. And that's it. Now I'm going to go over a few things, like a few important reminders in the next section, and that'll be the end of this video. So a few important reminders for the build. You do absolutely want shield charge on critical hit. You want Petrifying Slams on inflict elements, and you obviously will also want weapon techniques for elements as well, of course, but you definitely want those 2 things. And the primary method of scaling your shard is going to be water damage and then element power and duration. But remember, you need enough element power and duration to charge your shard after a single Northern Technique in order for the build to flow well. And again, a reminder why you need Petrifying Slam to inflict elements is for Mist Veil, which after a single Northern Technique you can Petrifying Slam, and then your shard will receive the benefits of Mist Veil. This is very strong, effectively doubles your damage, and mandatory for the build. Very, very good. And that's pretty much it, right? Again, just remember that you can charge your shard with shield damage. This includes shield consume damage, right? Like that. And that's pretty much all there is to talk about for the build. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It's a really fun build. Again, there will be Exalted Tower gameplay, links in the description and the comments. And I will catch you guys in the next video. So till then, take it easy, everybody.